one of Beyond the Numbers, this new series here. We're going to focus in on CertiDeath. So we are joined today by Jeff Anderson, PBI's Business Development Manager, and Jennifer Miller, the Plan Administrator for Michigan Education Association and ERISA lawyer. Moving into our agenda of topics that we will cover today, we will discuss the common challenges in pension administration, how CertiDeath has helped alleviate some of these challenges, and most importantly, the human impact. If we have time at the end, we will open things up for a live Q&A. We have a lot to discuss here, so I'll give the mic over to Jeff to get things started.
All right, that's perfect. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate that. And welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us today. So, Jen, you've been a PBI client for a little while, but I want to actually start the conversation thinking back before you were a PBI client and how you, when you entered the organization that you're with today with MEA, and sort of what the processes were that were in place at that point in time, and some of the challenges just overall with pension administration and what you were dealing with at that point.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for all those who are attending. I came in as a new plan administrator in 2017, and our system basically was all reactionary. If someone contacted us, we knew about a death. If someone told us through word of mouth that there was a death, we knew about a death. If we could get obituaries or people knew people, it was all through word of mouth and self-reporting. The problem became clear to me early on that people didn't have pensions in the numbers that they used to. And many families didn't even really understand what a pension was. Maybe mom or dad or a relative had a pension, but what that meant, how you stopped it, did it survive after death, was just unknown to people. So when I started, we were just completely reactionary, waiting for people and participants to contact us.
Okay, so that sounds like then you were getting some good, maybe some response from your participants and from the family members, but I guess what prompted you to make a change?
Well, the problem became, Jeff, and for those of you who are out there, you'll understand this, is that when you are waiting to be reactive, waiting for that self-reporting, sometimes it would be months late. And so the discussion became, sorry about your loss, who can we contact to get our $10,000 back? And the discussions became very complicated very early on. I had a case where siblings were lying about who was in charge of the estate, accusing each other of who took the money. And as I was flying down to Texas to go into court to try to retrieve the funds, I just knew that I didn't want myself in this situation again, because here you are, and the family was grieving. The family also was greedy, but they were grieving, and I'm the villain now in the story, right? I'm the big bad company person who comes in while they're grieving and trying to take away their money. And it just felt really bad, and it just wasn't a good use of our time and resources. So after that, I tried by going through the International Foundation and going to different websites, seeing if there was a better way.
Okay. And you're in Michigan, so I'm assuming that a plane ticket or a car ride to Texas was not what you wanted to be doing and how you wanted to be spending your money.
Not at all. And the problem becomes, as those of you who know, in plan administration, the DOL, even if the amounts are minimum, still puts the responsibility on plan qualification that you at least attempt to seek those funds back. And the problem is they don't define what attempt means, right? It's all up into interpretation. And so we got into this position of like, is it attempt a call? Is it an email? Do we actually have to file a case? What amounts would justify it? And so when you're waiting for the data to come in, the timing's all off, right? Because it's usually, I found, several months when the family kind of was getting multiple checks, like, what is this? We should call them. It really wasn't, the next day or the day after a death. Rather, it was very a long delay between the death and our notification, and it just didn't work. And again, it put me in the position of being the villain, right? I felt like a Bond villain, right? So sorry about your loss. I hope, you are able to grieve. Who can write out the check? And that just didn't feel right. And so that's when I started looking for a better way, because Social Security numbers and the Social Security Administration system don't work like they used to. And I'm sure some of you get death reports through your custodians, and they're just not accurate and they're not verified. And we didn't find those very helpful either.
Yeah, and were you utilizing any type of administrative partners that were providing any kind of death notification to you as well? You didn't mention that.
State Street through as our custodian would do a quarterly report, but we found the data completely wrong, right? Because they wouldn't search social security numbers, they would search like name and birthday. Well, my name's Jennifer Miller. You can only imagine how many Jennifer Millers might be born on the date I was. And so then, we would start looking at them and be in a full panic mode, right? Like, oh my God, all of these people died. And then we quickly realized that was more of a burden of a list than a help, because the amount of verification that was necessary just wasn't useful. And so that's when I kind of did an RFP and started digging in deeper to find a service that could help us.
Okay. And so when you conducted the RFP process, did you have awareness around PBI solutions or prior to that, or is
None.
that how you learned? Okay.
It was a foreign term to me. It was just one that had information available and a nice glossy brochure. And I thought, well, this will be, someone that we can get a quote from. But what happened during that process was I could see that the verification process through CertiDeath was going to be taken care of. By that, I mean, I didn't need another list like my custodian was giving me where 40 to 60% of it was wrong. And then me and my assistant had to go through and start doing verification and checking and making calls. That wasn't of an assistance. If I was going to spend the money and they were all virtually around the same cost, I wanted something that was one and done, that with minimal effort after the information, I could rely on that information. I didn't need leads, I needed information. And so many of the services provide you leads, but not information. And I thought, if I'm going to go to a service and spend this money, I want information. I don't have time for leads.
Yeah, and as you all know, CertiDeath is the only solution in the marketplace where it's a validated result, right? Rather than the data that you have to kind of figure out for yourself and determine, is it a good match or not. We'll jump into that a little bit more in just a minute. I do want to hear, I guess, just a little bit more about and the understanding of, so prior to being on the CertiDeath solution, were you the one having to conduct all the outreach, or did you have a team of people? Who was doing that work?
So because these conversations were so unpleasant and so difficult, I did it myself as the plan administrator. So what would happen is we had a team that would do the first call. And I'm sure you guys can all understand when you call someone and say, thank you for this information, we need this money back, the call escalates quite quickly. And I did not feel like that was appropriate to put my team in that position. So it fell on me because our goal, and we spent so much time trying to persuade families to pay us back those funds. A lot of times those funds had been spent on funeral arrangements, accounts were closed. And so the money just simply wasn't there. And that was the bigger problem. Is that, when the participant passes, if they don't have a spouse and the estate is dispersed, the money is simply not there. And so how do you collect money that doesn't exist? And I felt it put our whole plan in jeopardy of staying a qualified plan. And as a new plan administrator, I just was really uncomfortable. And I don't think I understood that much, to be honest, Jeff, of that part of the job. About, I didn't really think about how do you do death checks. Of course, the family just calls you, right? In my mind, they call the next day or 2 days later, when in reality, people don't understand even what pensions are anymore. I think the culture change away from pensions to 401ks has led people not to even think of, I need to contact a pension provider, I need to stop mom and dad's pension, where's this money coming from? And I don't think it's even malicious. I just think that we just don't have a population, that a majority no longer have pensions. They don't understand how it works. I think they think we just stop it. I'm not quite sure how they think it works, but it's not how it used to work. And so the old system of just relying on self-reporting that worked maybe in the 60s and 70s at that time, and Social Security being more forthcoming with information just simply didn't work in today's world. And quite frankly, talking about security, people think you're scamming them, right? You call up a child and you say, so yes, your sister reported that your mom and dad died and you're in charge of the estate and we're going to need $10,000. Who are you? Where are you from? Like, I'm grieving. Like, no, like, hang-ups and people really thinking that you're trying to scam them or try to get information from them when really you're just trying to do your job. Because many of them have no idea that mom and dad may have even had a pension. I think they think Social Security was the money that they were living on, not even knowing that a big component of it was the pension.
Yeah, yeah. It's very frequent to hear stories about, it's not necessarily always fraud, right? Oftentimes it's just not understanding or not knowing. And I've heard stories from many customers around the idea that when they've started with PBI and done their file cleanup with the CertiDeath solution, that they thought they had a good grip on the overpayments that were happening, even though they knew there were some that were happening, they were finding out about them. They didn't realize until the file cleaned up that money was just sitting in a bank account somewhere. And that's the frequent feedback I think that I get from clients after the cleanup. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the cleanup, for us, we have a pop-up benefit for those of you who might understand. If you leave it to a beneficiary and the beneficiary passes before you, you get a pop-up benefit. When we did our CertiDeath cleanup, we were also able to give people money. Talk about a great feeling, right? When you can call someone and say, I'm sorry, I saw that your husband passed. You didn't notify us. You're entitled to this pop-up benefit if we get a death certificate. Could you help us with that? We'd like to get you this pop-up benefit. So the cleanup was some work, but the CertiDeath, for those of you who don't know, you get an email weekly that notifies you of death. So once you do the cleanup, it's really on autopilot, which is just wonderful, right? It's not something that once you do your big cleanup, and you're going to be surprised how much cleanup you have, or at least I was. Once you go forward, you're kind of kept on track by the system itself, kind of holds you accountable. I said to somebody, it's like a tap on the shoulder each week. Like, don't forget, you've got to do death searches, and here's the information, and here's how many you have this week. It's this wonderful reminder, because as Secure Act 2.0 comes out, as RMDs are changing, as the pension world and the stock markets are changing, we have so many demands on us, those who are managing pension systems, that to me, it's the one thing that could slip away and kind of fall into the background. And one of the nice things about CertiDeath is once your data is cleaned up, you get this weekly report.
Yeah. The weekly report and that email, I hear that frequently around the fact that not only does the email alert you to how many validated deaths are going to be in your report that week, but if you happen to not have any that week, it's a 0, which means you don't need to log in to the portal to look at your report.
That's right. And so you're always on top of your job. I mean, one thing about the CertiDeath weekly reports is it gives you a number. You click on the report. One of the nice things is that it gives you a copy of an obituary, if there is one, a link to it. And, as we talk about customer service and how we manage plans in a more empathetic and human way, I take the time to read each obituary and may put in the letter a line or two from the obituary, or when I'm reaching out to the family, talk about something like, boy, he seemed like a really proud grandfather. Or, the picture of him fishing. I'm so glad he got time to enjoy fishing. Making those connections with the participants really is a joyful part of the job during a very sad time for them. And it makes these difficult discussions about transition off a pension or a change in a pension so much more palatable. And so one of the things you get is you get all the information that verifies the death, but then you get a link to an obituary. And I just think that really humanizes the entire process, right? Because so much of what we do is numbers and papers and files and data and reports, and we sometimes lose sight of the humanness of all of this, right? And so I like the CertiDeath because I'll take that couple minutes, to read the obituary and kind of just put something in personal so that our participants know we do care about them. They're not just a number. And that's one of the biggest differences, honestly, Jeff. Like when you're reactive and someone calls you to give you the data, the first thing you think about is how much is it per month and how many months do I have to collect? I didn't like being that person. Knowing ahead of time and being able to proactively stop the benefit, I have like a standard sympathy letter, and we stop the benefit and we send a letter, and then we kind of look like these people who are on top of it, who are empathetic, who want to be there to assist, versus that kind of combative Bond villain that I felt like when I started the job, which is a really much better place to be in. And it builds confidence in your participants too. You know, when you know information, I think there's a confidence that your plan is being well run and that it is not their burden during a time of grief to report anything to you, but rather you are on top of it. You have control of the information and you're doing the best you can with the information you have. I think it really builds confidence. And so many, as soon as you call them, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I didn't call you. I didn't think to call you. It didn't even occur to me to call you. And you can rest assured and say, it's no problem. We've got it. You know, we want to be here for you and let's help however that transition is. So that has really been a nice change in the job because it's much better use of your time to be kind and empathetic and make a connection with a participant than go to war with a family in Texas, like I said earlier.
Sure. You've mentioned timing a few times now. Talk to me a little bit about how it was prior to CertiDeath and about how much time you think maybe it was to be having these interactions with your participants that had passed as opposed to now on the CertiDeath report.
So that's a good question. So before we would get a call, we'd have to verify it, research it, hope they'd send a death certificate or request one from the county. Then, because we weren't giving notice until at least 1, possibly 2, sometimes up to a year of payments had gone by, then we would have to strategize what the amount was, how much it would be to file court costs. Should we file and go ourselves? Should we hire attorneys in another state? Because our retirees in Michigan, I'm from Michigan, we have a lot of snowbirds. So it's not as easy as everyone kind of stays in state. No one stays in wintering in Michigan. So it would be hours, even if we could get the money back quickly, because we'd have to verify it, we'd have to send letters, we'd have to get death certificates, we would have to do the research, we'd have to reach out. The difference with CertiDeath is you get a report. I'd get, okay, we have 4 deaths this week, click on them, pull up the data. I'd stop the payments online, 10, 15 minutes, 4 are stopped. I have a standard sympathy letter to verify and to confirm. My assistant sends those out when I send the addresses. So we're talking about minutes versus at least 5 hours per death because, you know, someone calls, you can't just, okay, great, we're going to stop payment, right? I mean, that's the other thing. You still needed, because it wasn't verified in any way, you still had to verify all of that information yourself and do that background work yourself. And depending on how lean your office is, that's just not a good use of anyone's time. Because a lot of the information you get is just unreliable. You know, it's not like you can rely on Facebook or social media. It's not like Social Security will verify anything for you, right? So you really have to connect with a person or connect with a county clerk. Some county clerks would allow you to get death certificates online, some of them in person, some mail us a check and we'll mail you one. And so the amount of work that went with that was just so burdensome. So it really has been a game changer. I kind of view it as like having another assistant in the office, right? Like PBI is in charge of monitoring deaths. We issue the call and the letter, but that's their job. It's not my job anymore. It's not my job to verify it. It's not my job to worry about it each week or make a note not to forget to check. It's PBI's job now, not mine.
That's great. So, and yes, we are delivering a validated result, right? We have the technology that John mentioned on the front end of the call, the obituary database to extract the information, but we also have a team of people that are reviewing the information before they send it over to you to validate it and say, Jennifer, this is a good match. Here's the link to the obituary. One, I guess, piece with that I think is important too, and I'm curious what your perception of it is. I know from the numbers 4 or 5 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago, we were projecting a number somewhere in the 65% range, 70% range of the total results you get from CertiDeath are going to come from obituaries. So 65%, you would get this obituary link. The rest would come from the death master file, the Social Security Administration, or the state records, which is a Social Security number match, right? But so 65% of the time, let's call it, you would get an obituary link that would be helpful to what you're mentioning in your process. Now our numbers are telling us it's somewhere more around 80%. And part of that is the continued decline of the data coming from the Social Security Administration. The other part of it is the obituaries. Typically an obituary is written within a couple of days of a death. And then our team is able to validate that within another day or two, sometimes same day that comes through, right? So in your Thursday, do you get a report overnight on Thursday?
I do. And the nice thing about the obituary, for those of you on the call, is it verifies itself, right? Because you have the data on the participant's wife and beneficiaries. So just reading, they left their lovely wife and here's their name. And it just, to me, I read the obituary to be empathetic, to reach out and be proactive, but it also, just reading the obituary verifies the information, more than you would even suspect, because it's like, yep, he had 3 kids. Those are his beneficiaries. That's his lovely wife, Joan. And so it really kind of, and it usually may mention their employer, spent so many years working at the MEA, proud MEA member, those types of things when you read the obituary. And in regards to verification, for me personally, how I run my plan is we cut the benefit and then we send a letter. I feel so confident in PBI's results. I've been with PBI several years now. There's not been one that's been incorrect. And so I don't waste any time in cutting off the benefit, because I would always rather give someone a retro benefit, even if there was some kind of cross, than have to take someone to court and get the benefit back. That's just my philosophy, and I've had the board approve that policy. Because for those of you, if you go to CertiDeath and use PBI, we put it in our DOL policies and our policy handbooks. So we actually mention PBI by name, so that the DOL, and I've been through a DOL and an IRS audit, we mention PBI by name so that they know that we are using a professional resource, that it is part of our process, it's part of our checks, that this is how we monitor it, that we get a weekly report. We actually put it in our policies because we view it more like a partnership instead of having office staff do it. Because really, unfortunately, I don't know how office staff could do it anymore. My person who was doing it, his name's Cindy. I'm just going to call her Cindy. But Cindy doesn't have, with Social Security being so tight with information, with so much inaccurate information at Facebook and websites and things like that, it's really just been an invaluable tool. Jeff, if I can give an example, we had a woman who was getting a divorce and was a victim of domestic violence, severe. Her husband called in and said she had died, and that he was to get the benefit. He was doing this as a form of harassment, and that it didn't come up in the PDI report. I said, well, I get a report, sir. If you can send me a death certificate, that will be fine. Otherwise, I'll wait for the PDI report. Reached out to the phone number we had for the participant, found out this story. I think back to our reactive method. Before, if someone reported a death, okay, husband reports the death. Good to go. Let's send a death certificate. Let's do this. That's just an example of like security and safety that really was personal to me. And my beliefs is that we really protected a woman whose husband was trying to manipulate the system, reporting her death, trying to commit fraud, and knowing that it didn't come up in the PBI report, because he had said she had died like a month ago. And I'm like, there's no way it hasn't shown up in the PBI report. That is just one example of how our reactive method pre-PBI would not have worked, because we would have believed it and we would have done, maybe we'd have to owe her retro, but we would have sent the letters and that. Having that verified professional report is so much better than relying on individuals. I'm sure you all know the world's changed a lot and people are a little bit different now. And so you have to be suspect of all the information you get. And so that's just an example I had just popped in my head about where PBI really saved a woman a lot of money and time and harassment because we knew she had not died.
It's great that you have that level of confidence. And you should. We see the numbers, we see the results, and I certainly have that confidence in our solution. And it makes me feel good to hear that from a client that's been with us for roughly 5 years, 6 years now. So.
Yes, and I will say the only hard part about switching to PBI is you'll have a real crisis of conscience about your data, because you will have more data wrong in your own internal, right? So like your social security numbers are wrong, your information is wrong, and many of you are in these positions and didn't put the data in, right? You're kind of like left the data that you're given. And so just going through the process has been a good process, in that it really has made us take another look at all of our data.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about that just for a second, because you've got your standard report that comes to you on a weekly basis from CertiDeath. So we're monitoring results daily. Our team is looking at the results and determining, is this a valid match? And then you're not even seeing the invalid matches, right? So there's a big pile of possible obituaries and possible matches that we're not even putting in front of you because we've looked at them and we've determined you don't need to look at this. This is not a good match, right? But there are other reports and tools within CertiDeath. So one of those is a social security number validation report. You mentioned to me that's been a helpful tool for you. Talk to me just a little bit about some of the data and the validation and what we've been able to do for you there.
So the Social Security validation is so great for those plan administrators and administrators out there, especially I have found with surviving spouses and joint and survivor beneficiaries. A plan participant, instead of taking the paperwork home to verify a Social Security number, thinks they have it right. And so they have theirs correct, but then they're leaving a joint and survivor benefit to a dependent and they don't have their Social Security number correct. And so when we can see that it's not going to be correct, we can use the Social Security checker is what I call it. Oh, I'm going to use the Social Security checker, the address checker, because PBI has multiple sources. And that Social Security checker allows you to verify that the information you think you have correct is actually correct. And it allows you to go back to the participant if it's not. And, you know, we even do it as a courtesy to our participants. We don't want to call them and over the phone say, is that a 7 or a 1? We can't make it out. We'll just use PBI. We'll get the information and we'll update it. And then we save ourselves a call, more confusion, more paperwork. And so we have found that really helpful, especially as you deal with a larger aging population. Mm-hmm. Some of the handwriting becomes shakier or harder or more illegible. And so it's just been a really good tool to kind of make sure that we're on the same track. And we do those usually if we have any doubt at all, we just do it right from the beginning to make sure that we have the data correct so that it's in CertiDeath so that the death pops up if it needs to.
That's good. And just for clarity, so the CertiDeath solution, as part of your subscription to that, includes a Social Security number validation report. The report itself flags any incorrect or invalid socials, but we're not necessarily giving you the social back. And then what you're referring to is that additional tool, the ad hoc tool, when you do decide. So in CertiDeath, we're sort of calling out, hey, these are participants that you may want to take a next step with to conduct a validation, whether you use our solution or reach out to your participant directly. But that is an additional tool that's in that CertiDeath solution. So, well, Jen, this has been really great, and I have some more questions for you. But we had a really good question come in that I do want to ask you. So, the question was, Jennifer, what were your outstanding death overpayments pre-PBI? And what are they today, if any? And I think this was another question. That was the question from one of our audience members. The question that I had sort of loaded for you was I was going to ask about when you transition to PBI to the CertiDeath. You referred earlier to the cleanup and some potential overpayments there. So talk to me a little bit about that. Did you have your hands on what you found in the cleanup and then where you're at today?
So we found in our cleanup tens of thousands of dollars. It's being recorded. I don't want to like the DOL's on here, but we found tens of thousands of dollars. I'm very happy to report we have 0 right now, which is just a great finding. We found tens of thousands of dollars both ways, right? Like I said, we had pop-up benefits we weren't paying, where participants hadn't notified us of a death of a spouse and should have gotten more money. And then we had payments that were continuing that the death hadn't been reported in a timely manner and needed to. And so over the first year that we kind of dug in on the PBI CertiDeath, we cleaned most, if not all of it up. We were able to get all the funds according to legal standards back, and right now we're at 0. And again, partly that's because of the verification. So for us, our board policy is if it comes up on PBI, we stop payment and then we ask questions. And because it's so proven to be so valid that we can rest assured that stopping payment is not going to hurt someone because it's always been right. And so when you can, stop that payment before the first of the month, when you can stop that check from even hitting, it just makes it so much easier. And like I said, on the rare chance that something was wrong, which we've never experienced, we could always retro. And so we are now just extremely proactive. to make sure that we stop it right and when it comes. So when we get that Thursday email, you know, it's what's so great about it is you can't forget to do it because it's in your inbox, right? I always say, you know, whoever at PBI made them email you your guilt of make sure you do this part of your job was brilliant, right? Because if you had to go check yourself, you know, you get busy, you forgot, yep, you were going to do that, you got stuck on a call, yep, the Zoom ran late, this crisis happened, the debt ceiling's falling apart, you know, all of these things happen. When you get that email, you can't run it, right? You can't avoid it. It's in your inbox. And so it just becomes part of your weekly to-dos in a way that you don't have the burden of reminding yourself, they remind you. And so with that, we have, right now, I'm very proud to report we have 0, because you know within a week, at most 2 weeks, and so you're able to stop that payment. And when you stop payments early, even if you may have missed one, let's say someone dies on the 31st and you're paying them the 1st, right? And so that's not going to come up, you know, same day. When you catch it early enough, the family is much more willing to work with you. The estate hasn't been closed, the bank accounts haven't been closed. And another thing we haven't mentioned is a lot of our participants, if not a majority now, are on direct deposit. They prefer that form. Well, you can withdraw those funds back, right? So we haven't even talked about that aspect of it, but that has also been a key portion. Instead of having to rely on the family to return the money, you have the right as the plan administrator to direct deposit and then withdraw that amount. So we have really gotten to a 0 overpayment stance. And down to, if I may, during my DOL audit, they asked that same question and I said 0. And they said, no, you didn't respond. You had a 0. What is the amount? And I said, it's 0. Like that is the response, because they kind of were thinking I was avoiding the question in the survey, but we just simply don't have any right now. Now
Sure.
I need to knock on something, everybody. Yes.
Right. Now, you mentioned something or implied something, and I want to provide a little bit of clarity as well, because a lot of people that are using a death audit solution that are not using CertiDeath today, our concept is a little bit different because you upload a file with us and we're continuously monitoring that file and providing you a weekly result. And we're doing that until you upload a new file to us. And the thing that you mentioned that got me thinking about it is with people on electronic deposit today, people are moving all the time and not telling you, right? And CertiDeath is able to some extent overcome, because of our validation process, we can overcome some data challenges, right? So if an address isn't correct in your file, if the zip code is incorrect, someone has moved somewhere, because of our process and our validation, we can tell that that obituary actually still belongs to your person on your record. Have you experienced?
So Michigan, yes, I would say anyone who dies in the winter for us isn't at their address. So in Michigan, it's called snowbirds. And these people go to Arizona, Florida, North Carolina for 2 to 3 months to beat the Michigan winters. And then their permanent address, 9-10 months a year, where they vote's all in Michigan. I can't tell you how much that happens, where the addresses, you know, not only are people moving more, but they're living in different parts of the country at different parts of the year, and they're traveling. And so there's no way that an address search would pick these people up, you know. And I even say, when I reach out to the spouse, would you like me to update your address? No, it's still Michigan. Like we're coming back to Michigan. Don't change it. I like my tax set up there. I like my pension being, you know, paid into that bank there. Don't change it. But we're down here now. And so that's a really good point. Like I said, I'm in the Midwest in Michigan, but in the winter, it's all over because people season different places every single year. They rent apartments, they, you know, VRBV, they kind of go all over the country. And if they pass away, the address locator isn't going to work at all. And like I said, even when you say, would you like me to change your address? Please don't, because these are not permanent addresses. We're seeing so much permanency being eliminated, right? Cell phones allow you to not be encumbered by a landline, right? Email and text messaging doesn't make you, a change to your mailbox. And so direct deposit doesn't mean that you can have your money wherever you're at, wherever in the world you're at. And so people don't feel encumbered to be at a certain address anymore. And, you know, especially since COVID has ended, our seniors are traveling more and more, right? They're staying with different family members. They're kind of all around the country. And so, I mean, we have even gotten from Alaska, we had someone die from Alaska, got an obituary from Alaska. Person died during an Alaskan cruise and knew, like, had a sister there who wrote the obituary. I mean, it's really kind of surprising. And what it affirms to me is, and I don't know how big all of your offices are, I wish I could talk to you, but we just don't have the staff for that, right? Like, we just simply do not have the staff to be everywhere at all times and to monitor all of these people who are moving all the time, right? And even spouses now, you know, they live at different addresses since COVID. And I'm going to winter, but I'm not retired, so I'm going to stay. And so that is a really good point, that as the world has changed and people are becoming just not permanent to anything, it becomes harder and harder to track them.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, I think we've ran overtime. So really, really appreciate your time today, Jennifer. And it's very clear that you are passionate about putting the people first and taking care of your participants. Very happy to hear that we've been able to help play a part in that process. But we very much appreciate your time today. And I think if you have any final words.
I would just say, you know, no matter what you do, having a CertiDeath type of valid death search that you can be proactive on is really a game changer, not only for your time, but your mental health, right? When you can reach out to families proactively and be a source of comfort, concern, and assistance versus someone who is trying to beat them over the head with, you know, why didn't you tell me earlier? We're going to need these funds back. It really not only changes the amount of work, but the quality of the work. And now I kind of feel myself as someone who assists families in a time of need versus being someone who is a source of grief in a time of grief. So I think it's just really a great way to kind of change the mindset on how you look at death benefits. And while it's a sad time, when you can comfort the family, I think that's giving the most respect to the deceased participant that you can. When you're reaching out and making things easier for them, giving them the paperwork they need, the information they need, and not putting the burden on them, what better gift to the deceased participant who work for these companies than to do that?
Very good. Well, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
For anyone in the audience that asked a question that we did not get to, we will certainly reach out to you. Feel free to reach out to us directly as well in follow-up if you'd like to speak sooner than we're getting to you. I want to wish everyone a fantastic day and have a wonderful rest of the week.